Welcome everyone to our lecture online series today. Our session will be recorded and we will upload the video to our webpage. Today, we are honored to have our CBS Assistant Professor, who is also Tony Koyun Scholar in Buddhist Art and Culture, Dr. Chonghui Cho, to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Cho, please.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to attend the online lecture series. Today is the first lecture by Professor Osmond Poparacci, who is the adjunct professor of Central and South Asian art, archaeology, and numismatics, University of California, Berkeley, and emeritus director of research of the French National Center for Scientific Research. He's a numismatist, historian, and archaeologist. He has authored 14 books, edited 6 books, and published 165 research articles in reputed international journals. He has read 91 papers at international colloquia, presented 275 conferences in 80 cities, and he has carried out 120 archaeological missions in 24 different countries. Professor Poparacci holds a BA from the University of California and a BA honors MPhil PhD from the Paris I-Sorbonne University and a higher doctorate from the Paris Ivy Sorbonne University. He recently published the book on Gandhāran art entitled When West Met East, Gandhāran Art Revisited, based on a selection of his hitherto unknown masterpiece from Gandhāra and Greater Gandhāra, dispersed in museums and also private collection in Japan, Europe, Canada, and United States of America. And today we are very happy to have this opportunity to invite Professor to give us online lecture. Also, we are very happy to meet many audience from the world, from the West and also from mainland China. We also have some honored guests I can see from online. Thank you very much for your participation. And let's welcome Professor to give us lecture now. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much. Before I start, I would like to thank Professor Shunki Chu of the Center for Buddhist Studies of the University of Hong Kong for inviting me for the second time to her department to deliver these 2 talks. I would have loved to be there like last time, but because of the pandemic, I would be able to come, so we will do the discussion online. And also, I would like to thank Ms. Amish Yu, project manager, and Ms. Lucia Chan, the executive assistant of the Center for Buddhist Studies at the University of Hong Kong, who took care of all the logistics with immense kindness. I just heard that many scholars and students are listening to my talk today, and I will do my best to meet their expectations. I will start straight away the talk. I would like to dedicate this talk to in memory of Professor Stanley Insler, who was the former professor of Sanskrit and comparative philology of the Yale University. For his friendship and inspiration, you will see in this talk, the discussions I had with him with his immense knowledge helped me to come to some valuable conclusions. As Professor Shungi said very correctly, today's talk is based on my recent book called When West Met East, Gandhāran Art Revisited, published last year by Manohar in New Delhi. So if someone asks me to give a brief summary of what we mean by Gandhāran art, I would say it is a form of figurative sculpture born in the Gandhara region between the 2nd and the 5th centuries of the Common Era. Gandharan art reflects regional cross-cultural elements arising from its direct relationship with Buddhism and to some extent with Hinduism, given that both flourished in India during the Kuṣāṇ Empire. In relation to other forms of figurative art depicting the Buddha, particularly in Amaravati, Nagarjunakonda, and Mathura, Buddhist art in Gandhara is characterized by a naturalism reminiscent of Greek classical art. Today, I won't be talking about the other parts, which especially the Scythian and other inspiration. So if you just would like to know where it is, in the yellow circle, this is what we mean by Gandhara and the Great Gandhara. Earlier it was in ancient India, today it's in Pakistan. So when West met East, new forms of art were born. Buddhism provided new grounds for innovative artistic expression. The presence of Greek in the area since the conquest of Alexander the Great is an important historical fact. However, Gandharan reliefs also owe a great deal to the Persians, Roman, Parthians, Scythian, and above all, Indian traditions. Through these interactions, a new composite art, characterized by its singularity, was born in Gandhara. Today, I'll be emphasizing mainly on the Hellenistic inspiration, leaving aside the Persian, Parthian, even Roman and Scythian inspirations. All of you have heard about Gandhara. Just to give you a brief summary, I'm just showing you one of the biggest Gandharan site, which is in Takshila. Right in the middle, we have the Dhammarajika Stupa and the monastery around it. We also have heard about Taktibai, which is a very important site. Although we see the buildings empty today, at the time, in ancient times, even at the time of its discovery, all the niches had their sculptures and also the stupa had their reliefs. They were all removed and distributed among Pakistani, Indian museums and also in European museums. This is Budkara, extensively studied and excavated by the Italian archaeologists. You can see the big stupa here and also the part of the monastery. I'll be talking much about the Hadda Tepe, which was excavated mainly by the Afghan archaeologists with Professor Saimat Tarsi and also by the French and other Afghan archaeologists. So it is well known Alexander the Great conquered the territories as far as the Indus Valley in present-day Pakistan in his attempt to seize the entire Achaemenid Empire. So this is what he did. This is the Achaemenid Empire before the conquest of Alexander the Great. And here is the route taken by Alexander. You can see he captured almost all the territories which were under the Achaemenid Empire. This is a part of a coin that where you can see the Porus fighting, or Alexander fighting with Porus. So after the fight, of course, there was no fight actually, but Porus was defeated. There was no duel between Alexander and Porus, but the Indian army was defeated. So when Porus stood in front of Alexander, Alexander asked, "How should I treat you?" And Porus said, "Treat me like a king." So this is what happened. Impressed by the personality of Porus, Alexander put him in charge not only of the satrapy that included his kingdom, but also the territory between Jhelum and Chenab. Alexander then proceeded to the Bears and came into contact with the kingdom of Philgias. Exhausted by endless marches, Alexander's army refused to continue. Sailing down the Indus, he reached Patala, and from there he began a long and tedious march towards Babylonia, where he died on the 10th of June, 323 BC. So this would have been the route that Alexander has taken. So after the Alexander's death, Seleucus was undoubtedly the greatest of Alexander's marshals and successors. In 306, Seleucus declared himself king and founded his capital at Seleucia on the Tigris. He also became king most of the satrapies of the old Achaemenid Empire, including Syria, Mesopotamia, Persia, Chorasmia. The satrapies of Parthia, Arya, Bactria, Sogdiana, and Gandhara theoretically passed under the domination of the dynasty of the Seleucids. But soon after the death of Alexander, a king called Chandragupta founded the empire that we know, that we call the Mauryan Empire, and he conquered the territories conquered by Alexander up to the Hindu Kush range, which was the natural barrier which divided Bactria from India. His son was Bindusara, and of course we all hear about Ashoka, who must have reigned circa 270 to 230. I have taken the chronology given by Romila Thapa, the grandson of Chandragupta, who started his career as a governor of Taxila. The Mauryan Empire achieved its greatest expansion, and Buddhism became the court religion. He brought the Mauryan Empire to its territorial zenith, thanks to his conquest, extending it from the Hindu Kush to the foothills of the Himalayas, including Kashmir and maybe also Bhutan and Nepal, and engulfing Mysore to the south of Bangalore. So here is a photograph of the Hindu Kush range, which was a natural barrier, about 800 kilometers long. The highest point is about 7,708 meters. So it was very difficult to pass or to go to the other side of the Hindu Kush. So it served as a natural barrier. So Chandragupta's empire came up to the Hindu Kush, and it's quite possible when Ashoka became a Buddhist, it is said that he constructed 84,000 stupas. So Dharmarajika, which is in Greater Gandhāra in Taxila, was probably built by him. So it shows that by this time, by the time of Ashoka, in 3rd century BCE, there was an important Buddhist community in the Gandhara. So this is, we believe, the limit of the Mauryan Empire coming up to the Hindu Kush mountains, while the Chandragupta, Bindusara, and Ashoka were reigning. The Greeks, who were the successors of Alexander the Great, rule in this area. Of course, the north of the Hindu Kush mountain went under the domination of Seleucids. Seleucus came to conquer the region, but he knew that he can't conquer Chandragupta, so he made an agreement and went back with 500 war elephants, giving the territory south of the Hindu Kush mountains to Chandragupta. We hear in a summary left by Justin of the work of Latin historian Pompeius Trogus, who wrote in the time of Augustus, Historiae Philippicae, relative to the history of Macedonia, that a certain Diodotus, governor of 1,000 towns of Bactria, revolted against the Seleucids and took the title of the king. Here we have the portrait of the king on the obverse, and on the reverse, Diodotus means the gift of the god. So he has Zeus thundering, and with the legend Basileus Theodotu of the king Diodotus. When taking the advantage of the decline of the Mauryan Empire after the death of Ashoka, the greatest of all the Mauryan kings, Demetrius I, son of Euthydemus, pushed the Greek conquest further and extended their kingdom beyond the Hindu Kush mountains. So as the conqueror of India, he is showing, like Alexander the Great, wearing a scalp of an elephant, and on the reverse is their prototype, or the type of the dynasty, Heracles. So from this moment onwards, so we are talking somewhere about 190 BC until about 10 to 20 CE, the Greeks in power in Gandhara and after that in Punjab. So the Greek kings who ruled in Bactria, they issued monolingual coins, and those who crossed the Hindu Kush mountains and came to south of the Hindu Kush started minting bilingual coins. So here is a coin of Euthydemus. You have the idealized portrait of the king on the obverse, and on the reverse Heracles seated on a pile of rocks with the club, and the legend is Basileus Theodotu, meaning of the king Euthydemus. These coins were struck according to a religious etiquette, coming up to about 16.80 grams. And this is a bilingual coin issued by one of the kings called Nicias, On the obverse, we have Basileus of Nikio of the king Nicias the Savior. And here, written in Kharoshthi, the language is Gandhari, Maharajasa, Tatarasa, Nikyasa. Only difference is he's called Maharaja, the great king. And they were issued according to Indian standard. The Greek kings who were already ruling in the region south of the Hindu Kush, the Gandhara in particular, exercised their power for more than 100 years. Menander I, whose reputation as a good king inspired some classical writers, was no doubt the greatest of all the Indo-Greek kings and the only Greek king in India to appear in Indian literature. I am referring to Milinda Panna, the Pali version of the Sanskrit Milinda Panna, the question of King Milinda. According to Plutarch, who was a Greek philosopher and historian, I quote, when a certain man named Menander, who had been a good king of the Bactrians, died in the camp, the city celebrated his funeral as usual in other respects, but in respect of his remains, they put forth rival claims and only with difficulty came to terms, agreeing that they should divide the ashes equally among the cities of his kingdom and should erect monuments to him in all their cities. End of quotation. The decision to divide his ashes among the cities of his kingdom has clear Buddhist implications. The episode reminds us of the passage in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta in the Digha Nikaya, relating the famous dispute that took place among the Indian kings to divide up the ashes of the Buddha in order to deposit them in a series of stupas. Here I am showing you one of the reliefs from Gandhara. They are Drona, the Brahmin, dividing the ashes of the Buddha. Buddhists may have largely benefited from the royal patronage of this good king. What is certain is that at that time of Menander, Buddhism was already solidly implanted in Gandhara. So this is a very brief history to understand the presence of the Greeks and the other nomadic tribes. So starting from the Bactrian kings, and then the Indo-Greeks who ruled in Parapamsadaya, Arakosia, Gandhara, and Punjab, ended up with Strato. At that time, Indo-Scythians and Indo-Parthians conquered some part of their kingdom, and the Yuvechi, who became later Kuṣāns, penetrated into Bactria, and then later they invaded the south of the Hindu-Kush mountains, meaning India. So here are the kings like Kujula Confucius, Sotemegas, Vima Taktu, Vima Confucius, Kanishka, Huishka, and Vasudeva. They were the Kuṣān kings, and it is believed that anthropomorphic images of the Buddha were introduced during the time of Kanishka I. Not that Buddhist art didn't exist before, but to represent the Buddha in human form started during the period of Kanishka. So, I mean, in a narrow way, this should have been the Kuṣāṇ Empire, which is a very big kingdom. At least we know he was, according to the excavations in Allahabad, Daishatra, and other places, and also going up to Alexandria of Iskate, today's Leninabad. What is left of the Greek heritage in this region? It's quite important to know. And for example, the well-known organized Greek city of Iconum, excavated by French archaeological mission in Afghanistan under Paul Bernard between 1964 and 78, is no doubt the best revelation of the architectural skills of the Greco-Bactrians or the heritage of the kings who ruled in these areas. So here is Paul Bernard with the former Japanese emperor. Here is an aerial view of the city, recent aerial view, of course, after the destruction and clandestine diggings. So some of the images, that restitution that I am showing you, they were made by the Japanese television channel NHK with our laboratory in the Economan area, especially with our architect Kilakuyo. So the city should have looked like this. like the main axis here, and the other buildings like the residential quarters, palace, theatre, gymnasium, and ramparts. It was a huge palace in Greco-Bactrian architecture, somehow reminiscent of formal uh, uh, Persian palatial architecture, was in the center in the lower city. So it could have looked like this during the time, at least in the 2nd century BCE. And they had private houses. So these are, I mean, here you have during the excavation, and here is the restitution of the private houses. Importantly, for today's talk, it had a classical theatre with 35 rows of seats, would sit 4,000 to 6,000 people. It was equipped with 3 lodges for the rulers of the city. Its size was considerable by classical standards, larger than the theatre at Babylon. And they had a gymnasium, 100 by 100 meters, which is one of the largest in antiquity. A dedication in Greek to Hermes and Heracles was found engraved on one of the pillars. So this is a restitution of the gymnasium. The largest temple in the city apparently contained a monumental statue of seated Zeus, but was built of the Zoroastrian model, massive, closed walls, instead of the open column circle structure of Greek temples. So these are some of the sculptures and artifacts found during the excavation. There were many, but just to give you an idea about the importance of Greek heritage in Iconium alone. Not only Iconium, but also there were other cities. Unfortunately, most of them were not properly excavated because of the disturbances of the later layers. Now, for example, Begram, in 327 BCE, Alexander the Great captured the city and established fortified colony named Alexandria of Caucasus. Begram Kapisa became the summer palace of the Kuṣāṇ Empire in the 1st century CE. The arrow shows the Kuṣāṇ wall, which is not yet excavated. But the French archaeological delegation worked there in Begram extensively. The objects found by Joseph Akan and Ria Akan in rooms 10 and 13 of excavation number site during the campaigns of 1937 and 39 are generally referred to as Begram treasure. These remarkable finds, extraordinary in number as well as artistic value, consisted of objects as diverse as their places of origin. Among the finds were objects of carved ivory and others of bones from India, subcontinent, plaster, bronze, glass objects from Roman world, and fragments of Chinese lacquer. So just to give you an idea of some of the objects found, and here you have the emblema, Endymions eternal sleep. Here we have the combat between Hector and Achilles. Here a statue of Harpocrates and Serapis. The important thing is, even after the decline of the Greek power, which came to an end around the 10th CE of the Common Era, the contacts with the Mediterranean world were continuing. So looking at the background material, one can imagine most of them came from Alexandria in Egypt. So they have used the Red Sea, and then they have come to the Erythraean Sea, the Indian Ocean, and taken the Indus River and the rest of the, of course, land route. They must have reached Bactra and also Begram and many other cities like Taxila. So it is important to underline here the continuity of this region with the Greek world. In this talk, I'll be referring, of course, here is Gandhara. I'll be referring partly to Sanchi, Bharut, and also Mathura, and Amravati and Kanagandhali, and also Nagarjunakonda. Because especially Kanagandhali, Amravati, Nagarjunakonda, and Mathura are contemporary to Gandhāran art, I mean 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. So what are the Greek elements that we see in Gandhāran art? First of all, the Greek architectural elements. Here is the temple of Zeus in Athens. with the columns surmounted by the Corinthian capitals. And the same type of Corinthian capitals were found during the excavations in Icanu, and also the recent excavations at Bactra and many other places, and also the other orders like Ionian and Doric orders were found in these cities. An important thing is the Corinthian capitals were decorated and imitating the acanthus leaves, which repeatedly comes in the reliefs of Gandhara. And in Gandhara, they use these columns surmounted by the Corinthian capitals to separate the scenes. Here is a good example, and also in a way to show how the Gandharan artist depicted the scenes. For example, here we have the dream of Maya, and we can see the old small elephant entering the womb, and this is what she was dreaming. I mean, logically speaking, we should not see this because the event took place inside a room in the palace. So what the artist does is that he takes the front wall out. So let us see what is happening inside the room. It's almost like a theater. It's like an act stage on the theater. So this aspect is highlighted by the columns. And if you look at Gandharan art, I mean, this is a sequential events, one after the other in the chronological order. I will come to that later in following to a certain extent Laritavista. So again, the staging is Greek. When you compare two schools, here we have Gandhara, the events are separated by columns. But if you go to Nagarjunakonda, the events are separated by Maithuna couples. And this is a basic difference. And also these Corinthian capitals were highly stylized later in Gandhara and also Greater Gandhara, I mean in Afghanistan. This is a small collection which is exhibited in Museum in Paris. The acanthus leaves are there, but they added different Bodhisattva figures, Surya, and sometimes even the Buddha. And again, we can have a look at the Greek furniture, for example. Here is again another depiction of the dream of Maya. Maya is lying on the bed and the elephant is broken, but we have to imagine the elephant entering the womb of Maya. Not that the elephant entered the womb of Maya, but she was dreaming that the elephant was entering. But look at the bed. This bed is not Indian. It's decorated almost like a Greek bed. I'll show you one example here. This is from Nicomedia, dated 200 BCE, and you can see the bed. It's exactly almost the same type of decoration. I'll give you another example here. Gandhara 1, again, the dream of Maya. And on the right-hand side, and you can see on the left-hand side, still with the color, the polychromy, terracotta. And this is dated to 3rd and the 2nd century BC, now with the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. So they used, I mean, I can give you plenty of examples where Greek furniture entered the Gandharan art. Not that what is depicted here is Greek, what is depicted is a Buddhist story, but they use the Greek motifs to highlight the story. So the difference is, for example, if you go to Bharut, and this sculpture is dated almost to 2nd century BCE, and this is 2nd century CE, look at the difference. They depict the same scene. Here the elephant is small, here the elephant is big, and also Maya is seated on a bed, which may look like an Indian local bed of that period. So this is the difference. And then Greek decorative motifs. I am showing you this one. I want to highlight only the bead and real border, but this scene for your information, which I published recently, the descent of the Buddha from the trithems of heaven, having preached the gods and his mother who became a god now. And here is depicted by a tree, and he's descending from the 3 staircases, the Buddha in the middle, Brahma on our left-hand side, Indra on the right-hand side, and then Utpalavarna, the Bhikshuni, coming in the chariot and embracing the feet of the Buddha. Here, they have highlighted it with the bead and reel motif, which is also found on this column of Ashokan period. So according to John Boardman, the bead and the reeds motif was entirely developed in Greece from motifs derived from the turning techniques used for wood and metal, and was first employed in stone sculpture in Greece during the 6th century BCE. And here is a coin of Apollodotus I, a Bactrian king who ruled in Bactria, and you can see the same border, which is served later in the Gandharan art as a decorative element. And if you take this, for example, how many Greek elements are here? The motifs are here. Here is a depiction of the Buddha's enlightenment and the defeat of demoniac army of Mara. And if you see here, the upper ashitra of the fourth cable panel adorned with row of dented motifs, followed by another row of 5-petal flowers alternating with lozenge motifs. And then again the Greek motif, the field above the upper lunette, decorated with 5-petal flowers set on either side of the central palmate pattern. And again, another pattern, the inner jambs on either side of central scene decorated with running scrolls of vine, leaves, and tendrils. Here is a good example from the Iko Hirayama Museum in Japan, where you can see again the Corinthian capitals, acanthus leaves for the border, and then these wine here, the grapes, and also the leaves and tendrils. And then Greek dresses. We know that chiton is a garment worn by Greek men and women from the archaic period through the Hellenistic period. And also we have imation, which is a mantle or wrap worn by ancient Greeks. And the same dress is found in Gandharan art. For example, I'm showing you the so-called Aphrodite or Venus found in the Marajika complex, where you have a little revised version of the Greek clothing. And also, for example, here, this is a very beautiful relief depicting the wedding of Bodhisattva Siddhartha with Yashodhara. Yashodhara, who is an Indian woman, but showed as a Greek woman. She is dressed like a Greek woman, including the coif, the headdress. So here again, the Greek motifs are used to relate or to narrate, to illustrate a Buddhist story. This beautiful relief, which is now in Zurich Museum, where you can see the temptation of Mara and the 3 daughters, and one is looking at the mirror, and this one is dancing, almost diaphanous clothes, transparent, and she is dressed like a Greek woman. But she is supposed to be one of the cruel daughters of Mara who try to distract the Buddha. The difference here is that if you look at the Nagarjunakonda in Andhra Pradesh, the Mara's daughters are depicted almost semi-nude, and in contrast with the one of the Mara's daughters in Gandharan art. And this difference is quite important in this demonstration. And also, most of these scenes I'll be discussing later, where you have Greek men and women, or what we call the Dionysian scenes. They are all dressed like Greeks. On the coins of Nikeas and Philoxenus and many other coins, sometimes the king who is diadem is depicted as a soldier with the breastplate. And here is a rider, most probably the king, because he is diadem. And these motifs were taken in Gandharan art. This relief was found in Bukhara by the Italian delegation, and here is a defeated army of Mara. They all look like Greek soldiers. So the Greek soldiers are here to show that they were the enemies of the Buddha, and they are a part of the demoniac army of Mara. And also in some of the reliefs that we see, these soldiers wear what we call cataphractus, which is meaning the heavy armor, right? And it's quite interesting, during the very tail end of the excavations in Icano, excavation done by my colleague Franz Brunet, they found an arsenal with 4 pieces of heavy armor made of iron were found in north extremity of the west building of the arsenal excavated by the French archaeologists in Icano. So this shows either the Greek soldiers or the mercenaries wore these cataphractus. And here you have the soldiers of Mara attacking the Buddha wearing almost the same armor, but only thing is they lost the translation. They lost in translation by putting these upward. In contrast, if you look at in Andhra art, you don't see that demoniac aspect of that you see in Gandhāra. Gandhāra, they attack the Buddha physically with swords and arms and with ugly faces. But here, this relief is quite interesting. The man with a slender body, standing in Tribhanga, three-bent pose, holding a sugarcane bow, and the flowering arrow is Mara, who is also Kama, the Hindu god of desire. The woman is Kama's most effective weapon. Kama even boasts in front of the Brahma of his capacity to triple gods, sages, demons, and to make Brahma and Vishnu go astray, and even Shiva fall. So in Andhra art, it's almost like a psychological war. But in Gandharan art, it is a physical war, using some Greek elements to demonstrate it. And then Greek techniques, how the Greek techniques came into Gandharan art. The technique of making acroleiths was quite popular in the Hellenistic period, or even before. According to this technique, the extremities of the statue, such as head, feet, and hands, were of solid material, while the rest was made of wood or clay. So Greek etymology, akros and lithos, height or extremity, and stone, lithos, as you know, is the stone. So the technique is that these parts are made of marble, and the rest, there is a wooden structure that you don't see because it was covered by by clothes. While the French archaeologists under Paul Bernard were excavating in the temple, they found these elements, a part of a foot of the god and the fingers. And with here you have the thunderbolt with the wings. My colleagues and also the Japanese NHK tried to restitute the image, how it looked like in the main temple, looking at the coins of Antiochus and the Hermias. And here is the feet, and here are the, of course, the fingers. And the rest of the body was made of wooden and covered by the clothes. So this is what we call acroleithing. In about 20 years ago, this head was found accidentally in the Iconographic area in north of Afghanistan, which is a 5-ounce head. It has reached 1,200 degrees, so it's very well baked. And what you see here, inside it is empty, and here you have a place to fit into a wooden structure. It's certainly a Bactrian king because he is gliding. So this should have been a real statue of a king. But importantly, I would like to draw your attention to this statue, only the head those days, which is called Ortiz head because it belonged to the former collection of George Ortiz. John Boardman, who wrote this wonderful book, The Division of Classical Art in Antiquity, says, quote, "The classicizing style and the excellence of carving would be hard to match in the contemporary Mediterranean world." So it's a beautiful head. It was in Geneva. First it came to New York and went to Geneva. While I was doing my research in Pakistan, I came to know that the bust was found, the bust of the statue was found. So thanks to my colleagues in Pakistan, I went to see the person who found it. And this is the bust. And you can see it was fixed against a wall, and these are the holes for the nails. And inside it is empty, and there were parts of the limbs. And of course, examples were taken, some marble examples from the broken pieces, and the marble came from Anatolia. So it's quite interesting. And also this photograph, which I published recently, which came given to me by the owner or the person who found it in Pakistan, at the moment, the head had two eyes, but during the transportation, the one eye was lost. So it's a wonderful testimony to attest where it was found. It was found in Takalbala, north of Peshawar. So it looks almost like a Bodhisattva image. I'm referring to the Bodhisattva image of Saribalol. There were about 3 or 4 now found. The treatment of the hair and the almost nude bare chest. So this is the restitution which I proposed with my good colleague Francois Uri. The statue was composite or acrylic, and it would have looked like this. And this is a typical Greek technique which was not attested at all in India at this period. And then we talk about the Greek naturalism. What is really important in Gandharan art is this naturalism, the natural expressions. This statue I published in the book for the first time, which is in the round, which is quite rare in Gandharan art. You can see both front and the back. Very, I can't say beautifully, but it is done in such a way. So if you read, I mean, this is the moment, the end of the 6 years of fasting or mortification or Dushkara Kriya of Siddhartha Gautama, the Bodhisattva. This is what Lalita Vistara says. And monks, when I thought I was touching my stomach with my hands, it was my spine that was feeling, that I was feeling. When I tried to get up, I was so bent over that I fell backwards. When with difficulty, I again got up and rubbed my limbs with dust. All the hairs came away from my body. So this is a wonderful depiction of human anatomy. I used to tell my students, this is about, 1,000 years before Da Vinci, where the Gandharan artists have very well studied the human anatomy. So there is some sort of a naturalism in it, which rarely you see in the other forms of Indian art, this kind of depictions. On the left-hand side, you have the one that I published. On the right-hand side, you have the one found in Sikri, now in the Punjab Museum in Lahore. So again, Lalita Vistara says, to understand this, the mortification of 6 years continued until the body of the Bodhisattva had become so weak, so feeble, and thin, that when grass and cotton were put into the openings of his ears, it came out through the nostrils. So this is the power of Gandharan art, of depicting a moment, a critical moment of Bodhisattva's life after or at the end of, or towards the end of 6 years of fasting. Again, this sculpture, which was in the front page of one of the volumes, this sculpture represents, I think, a Buddhist monk lamenting over the death of the Blessed One at the Mahaparinirvana, showing a Hellenistic inspiration over the Gandhāran Buddhist art. So I think it should be like this. This, of course, this relief is from Loriantanga in the Indian Museum of Calcutta, where Buddha's body, the dead body, is kept between two sal trees. And here you have the monks, and here Kashyapa, and also the other monks, and here is Vajrapani. And this is how, and the gods above, how it would have, how the passing away of the Buddha is depicted in Gandharan art. And this piece in Victoria and Albert Museum, so it is a Mahaparinirvana, where you have Vajrapani putting aside his Vajra. But I want to draw your attention to this person, a layman, who is crying with utter despair, showing the dead body of the Buddha above, which is lost today, and his left arm on the chest. And look at the way how the mouth is shown with the teeth. So the agonizing monk immediately reminds us of the man, half bare-chested, seated in a half-kneeling position, raising his right hand towards the Buddha's deathbed and keeping the left over the chest in sorrow, lamenting in agony and despair over the death of the Blessed One. When you go to the Hellenistic period, I wanted to draw your attention to this sculpture found in the 15th century, 16th century. The sculpture represents the Trojan priest, Laocoon, and his sons attacked by two giant snakes sent by Poseidon to prevent Trojan priest, who intended to warn the Trojans not to trust the wooden horse left by the retreating Greeks. So here is the Trojan priest attacked by the snakes, and here are his own sons attacked by the snakes. He sees his own death and the death of his own sons. And this is the real agony. The Trojan priest in front of his proper death. And on the other side, you have the cry of agony and despair of a monk at the death of his master. So the utter despair of the Trojan priest in front of his proper death is a precursor of the impressive and emotional expressions of the agonizing Buddhist monk and pain-stricken layman over the death of their beloved master. And again, this is what we call the naturalism in Gandharan art. And then the Greek artists used mythical creatures, gods, and goddesses to depict a Buddhist story, not a Greek story, but a Buddhist story. Here we have these. I mean, again, I take you to this sculpture where you have mythical animals. There are many mythical animals used as decorative pieces. And here one in the Tokyo Ancient Orient Museum in Tokyo. This one is in Musée Guimet in Paris. And if you look at the original, the inspiration came from most of these mosaics and paintings and sculptures. I am showing you one which was found in southern Italy, dating back to the 3rd century BC. It's a mosaic. And this one is a sea monster mosaic in Ostia, in Italy as well. So the half man and half sea monster, this is from the Metropolitan Museum. And again, you can compare them with the mosaics from Pompeii. Of course, they have to be dated before the 1st century CE. The double-tailed triton in Greek mosaic, 2nd century BC in the Sparta Archaeological Museum, and Gandhara reliefs in the private collection in Japan. Triton, or as you may pronounce it as Triton, is a Greek god of the sea, the son of Poseidon, Amphitrite, god and goddesses of the sea respectively. Triton or Triton is usually represented as an airman with upper body of a human and the tail, lower body of a fish. So this is what you see in many Gandharan reliefs. There are hundreds of them, and some are musicians playing the flute or the drums. The only difference is sometimes they have the wings, but they have the fish tail. Then garland bearers, which is a Greek motif which became very popular during the Roman period. I'm showing you one where this is the garland and it is carried by the putti or lotus in the Metropolitan Museum. And here is the Gandharan prototype, which is in the Matsuko Museum in Japan, where you have garland and amorini of Gandhara with the birds. So it's not that they are identical, but there is an inspiration. I'll be talking about this stupa later, but just to draw your attention to this register where you have beautifully executed Gandharan reliefs of garland bearers. And then, for example, let us say Atlas. The Farnese Atlas, it's the 2nd century CE Roman marble sculpture, also holding up a celestial globe. This is in the Naples Museum, probably a copy of an earlier work of the Hellenistic period. It is the oldest extant statue of Atlas, a titan of Greek mythology, who is represented in early Greek vase painting and the oldest known representation of the celestial sphere and the classical constellation. It's not that he is carrying the earth, but he is carrying the celestial spheres or the constellations. Atlas labors under the weight because he had been sentenced by Zeus to hold up the sky. The sphere shows a depiction of the night sky as seen from outside the outmost celestial sphere, with low relief depicting 41, some sources say 42, of the 48 classical Greek constellations distinguished by Ptolemy, including Aries, the ram, and Cygnus, the swan, and Hercules, the hero. So the same motifs was used in Gandhāran art. They don't carry the celestial sphere or the constellation, but they carry the building. And here it's a very, very nice example of the atlas, where you can see the difference is, of course, the Greek atlas was not wing, but they added the wings of Nike. He is muscular, but he is wearing, he is depicted like Heracles, wearing the skin of the lion that he killed from Nemea. And here is the tail of the lion. And only the Greek artists would do this because according to the Greek Greek tradition, this would not have happened. So here you have some of the places from the buildings from Dharmarajika. Here you can see the weight of the building on its shoulders and the arms, and again here. And then we look at the Greek gods and goddesses like Tyche and city goddesses. The Tyche, or rather according to the Greek Tuke, or it's a Roman equivalent is Fortuna, fortune, was the presiding tutelary deity who governed the fortuna and prosperity of a city, its destiny. In classical Greek mythology, she is the daughter of Aphrodite and Zeus or Hermes. Marble Roman copy of a Greek bronze original by a very famous artist of the 3rd century BC, depicting Tyche of Antioch, now in the Vatican Museum. So let us see the inspiration of this type of Tuke or the Tyche on the Gandhāran art. Here we have different types. She was definitely holding a cornucopia, but she has a headdress which looks like the towers of the city, and here also the towers of the city, and here are towers on her shoulders. The Greek Tyche, already popular in Indo-Greek coins and depicted in Buddhist art, holding a cornucopia or the cone of abundance, like here, is conflated in Gandhāran art with Hariti, who often appears next to her consort, Panchika, the god of wealth, as in the Iranian tradition of Pharaoh and Ardoksha. This is from the British Museum, the Panchika and Hariti. Hariti was a cannibalistic goddess who was later transformed into a symbol for the protection of children, easy delivery, happy child rearing and parenting, harmony between husband and wife, love, and the well-being and safety of the family. Women without children sometimes pray to her to help them to become pregnant. So I'm taking you to Hadda, the Tepeshoto, excavated by my good friend Saimat Tarsi. You have a niche with the Buddha. On our right-hand side, you have a depiction of Tyche holding the cornucopia. So here is a coin, a double-decker ram, which is, by the way, the biggest silver denomination ever struck in Greek antiquity, or the whole antiquity, struck by a Greco-Bactrian king. Here you have a Tyche, a city goddess, with the cornucopia and the tower on the head. And here she doesn't have a tower, but she has a cornucopia, and she is dressed like a Greek woman with diaphanous, transparent clothes. And the Al-Sabah collection in Kuwait, and very much thanks to them for giving me the authorization to show them. These cups or the bowls were found in Afghanistan, where you have the Tyche, or the Fortuna rather, holding the cornucopia. So Buddhist Kubera, Vaishravana, or Panchika associated with Hariti, there are many sculptures of this type in Gandhāran art. Just to summarize what I said up to now, before I continue further with the other gods, I took this sculpture, which will be exhibited in the Berkeley Museum soon, where you have these are of course the Persepolitan columns with the bell-shaped capitals, back-to-back animals like in Persepolis, but the Greek pseudo-Corinthian capitals. And here we have again Panchika and Hariti with the cornucopia, and you have Atlas holding the building, almost holding the Buddha who is seated here in Vitarka Mudra in preaching, and accompanied by two Dionysian couples or two flirting couples, to which I will come later. For example, we'll take two heroes. One is Heracles. Heracles was very popular in India and also very popular in Gandhāran. So Alexander's motivation, during his conquest, he went to today's Greece, today's Egypt and also to Libya, and went to the temple of Ammon. So Alexander's motivation to visit the temple of Ammon in Libya was partially attributed to his connection to Heracles. According to Arian, quoting, Alexander was also partly urged by a desire of emulating Perseus and Heracles, from both of whom he traced his descent. He also deduced his pedigree from Ammon, just as the legends trace that Heracles and Perseus to Zeus. Accordingly, he made the expedition to Ammon with the design of learning his own origin more certainly, or at least that he might be able to say that he had learned it. So this is from Anabasis of Ali. So when you look at some of the coins of the Bactrian kings, here we have the coin of Euthydemus, on the portrait on the obverse, and Heracles seated on a pile of rocks with the lion skin, with the club. According to Greek historian Polybius, Euthydemus became the king of Bactria by killing the successors of Tiridates. Euthydemus chose Heracles as his major monetary type, both because Heracles was popular in Magnesia on the Meander, the Greek city in Anatolia, from which he originated, and to identify himself with Alexander, who associated himself with Heracles. So if you look at the coins, there are many coins like Euthydemus, Demetrius, Euthydemus II, and Lysias, depicting Heracles on the reverse. These coins were in circulation, mainly in Bactria and some in the areas in India, in Gandhara. This statue of Heracles was found in the gymnasium in the legal excavation, and this was found in the Iconum area accidentally, and they all represent Heracles. You all may have heard about Mirzaka treasure, on which I have worked so much. There were 4 tons of coins with about 500 kilograms of objects. Among them, this cup was there. This is before restoration and after restoration. These Greek gods are depicted, most probably Artemis, Athena, Heracles, Hera, Dionysius, Aphrodite, and Apollo. So Heracles is given a prominent place. As you know, he was a human, a mortal, who became immortal and was accepted to the Greek pantheon. This restless weight, which is in the Metropolitan Museum, Heracles should kill the animal to have the skin, but both are here. Heracles with the club and the very wicked lion of Nemea, which could be killed only cannot be killed with arms. So Heracles killed it and wore the skin. The same Heracles was converted into Vajrapani, literally with Vajra in hand, has been used to refer to a protagonist holding the thunderbolt, depicting next to Siddhartha Gautama on the Gandhāran reliefs. He accompanies the latter from the moment of renunciation of his princely life onwards until the Mahaparinirvana and the passing away of the Buddha, except one scene, Vajrapani appears with Channa and Kantaka during his wedding ceremony. I don't want to go into detail. I have discussed this in detail in my book. Following Fouché's footsteps, somehow, I'm quoting from Jesse Pons, footsteps, some have identified the Vajrabhara as a Yaksha, who eventually became the eponymous Vajrapani. As such, he has been interpreted as protector of the cosmic and spiritual kingship of the Buddha, a figure whose function is material and derives from Buddhist, Greek, and Iranian thought as a sort of henchman, helping the Buddha to convert unbelievers. Others bade farewell to the old action theory and have preferred to recognize a guide who escorts Siddhartha Gautama on his spiritual quest, or else the Buddha's cousin Ananda. So I would invite you to read Desipon's article and also Etienne Lamotte, and also several articles written by Lina Suntoro. So Alfred Fouché defines the function of the Vajra as a symbolic instrument of his master's magic power. C'est l'instrument symbolique du magique pouvoir de son maître. It appears to me that Fouché's interpretation is still valid. Laura Giuliano suggests the possibility that the personage was perceived, at least in an early phase of Gandhāran art, as a sort of personification of the Vajra itself, with its appearance further explicating the values and significance of symbols. Monica Singh interprets the Vajra as a diamond, an object capable of crushing all the obstacles. So this piece in the Hirayama collection, where you can see the lion's head and pose here and the skin, and he's holding the Vajra or the thunderbolt. So we have discussed the importance of Taiki, and now we come to one of the most beautiful depictions of Vajrapani in Hadda. The Heracles prototype visible on the silver coins and gold coins of the demons is reinterpreted in the sculpture of Vajrapani from Tepeshotro. The bearded head and the muscular body of the hero have features reminiscent of the Lycidian style. This is what John Boardman wrote in his book. Here, Vajrapani is depicted in the guise of the Greek hero Heracles, who killed the lion of Nemea. The lion's head is placed on the left shoulder, and the skin of the beast passing over the hero's back reappear on his lap, knotted around the lower waist, with clothes falling outside the left thigh. In appearance, he is Greek, but the story is Buddhist. So if you just remove the thunderbolt and put a club, and if you don't say where it came from, and you would say this is Heracles of the Greek world, but he is not Heracles anymore. He is Vajrapani in a Buddhist context. So I'm showing you this wonderful relief, which was in the Kabul Museum, where you have Vajrapani with the club as an ancient memory, and also the thunderbolt. And here we have the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. You can see Vajrapani has already left the thunderbolt, as if, there's no purpose for him to exist because the Buddha had passed away. So I have another 26 minutes left. So I'll be talking about Dionysus, which is also an important element of our discussion. So if you listen to Diodorus, he says the most ancient Dionysus was an Indian. And since his country, because of excellent climate, produced the wine and abundance with cultivation. It was the first to press out of clusters of grapes and to devise the use of wine as a natural product. So there's a long description about the association of Dionysius with India, and one has to bear in mind, even before the arrival of Alexander, there was the wine culture in Bactria and today's Afghanistan, Pakistan, and also in Uzbekistan. And then according to the same Diodorus, then Dionysius made a campaign to India, whence he returned to Boeotia in the third year, bringing with him a notable quantity of booty, and he was the first man ever to celebrate a triumph seated on an Indian elephant. This is what you see here. So there are many depictions in Greek and Roman art. For example, here you have one from the Roman sarcophagus of Dionysius, where you can see his return to, he has come to Thebes by way of Lydia, Phrygia, Persia, Bactria, Media, and Arabia. Again, another sarcophagus of Dionysius in the Louvre Museum. And this one is in Getty Villa, where you can see Dionysius with his entourage like Pans and Maenades. And again, here another one from the Pergamon Museum, where you can see the chariot of Dionysius and Ariadne, I mean his wife, and the grapes, and the chariot driven by panthers, an association of Eretus, and all the other gods, and also creatures associated, semi-gods associated with Dionysius. The Maenades always clothes dance in the trance. The appearance of the satyrs with their mixture of human and animal features is to be understood as a form of masking a flat-nosed face with a beard, animal ears, conceals the identity of the wearer and the linen clothes, and very often erect leather furrows and the horse tail. So this is what Aryan say about Dionysius. It was in fact Alexander only who actually invaded India. Before Alexander II, there is a considerable tradition about Dionysius as having also invaded India and having subdued the Indians. About Heracles, there is not much tradition. As Dionysius, the city of Nisa, is known in memorial of his expedition and also Mount Merus and the growth of ivy on this mountain, and then habit on the habit of the Indians themselves setting out to battle with the sound of drums, cymbals, and their draped costumes like that worn by bacchanals of Dionysius. So here we are, the conquest of Alexander, as I told you at the very beginning, with Darius II. And then in the same cup from Mirzakar, Dionysius also is given a prominent place. He is seated on rocks over the panther skin, holding the thyrsus. The Dionysian culture is very much important in the Greek world, especially in Bactria and also in Gandhara, because the theatre of Icano is associated with Dionysius. These are the theatre masks found in the fountain in Icano. And here is a Cupid on an empty jar, seated, showing his empty cup, holding a bunch of grapes, and also ears filled with bunch of big grapes. And if you look at the coinage, Dionysius is not very often depicted, but on the coins, cophronical coins of Agathocles, we have Dionysius with the grape leaves here and the thyrsus, and here you have panther, his animal, in front of a grape vine with the legend Basilios Agathocles. There are many, I am not going to show you all of them. Many syllables were found with the Dionysian scenes, and here you have a repulsive worked emblema center with the bust of Dionysius. They are in the Al-Sabah collection. They are very nicely published by my good friend Martha Carter. I'm showing you some of them. And here again, Repulse with the bust of Ariadne, and the syllable repulsive worked emblemata of Dionysius is depicted as a pretty effeminate, long-haired youth, almost like a woman. And then you have Ariadne in the center. And here you have a silver plate depicting the procession of Dionysius and his retinue, composed of female Maenades, and most empathetically made satyrs, drinking and dancing. There are hundreds and hundreds of documents depicting Dionysius of the Hellenistic period found in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Tajikistan, in Uzbekistan, and in Pakistan. I'm not going to show you all of them. So the Dionysian culture was present in these regions. The founders of Greek Bactrian also appear to have fostered the preservation of Hellenistic style and imagery in the visual arts whenever possible, and the scenes from Greek myths depicting the silverworks seem to have been comprehensible to both artisans and patrons. The quotation is from Martha Carter's book. When you look at some of the important artifacts found, I have to mention Tilia Tepe, which is called Golden Mountain, excavated by the Soviet-Afghan team led by the Greco-Russian archaeologist Viktor Sadianidi, a year before the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The hoard is often known as Bactrian gold. There were more than 20,000 objects in it, but I am showing you two. One is this. On a pair of hooks, Dionysius and Ariadne are shown riding a panther. Ariadne holds a wine cup, while Dionysius touches her breast. Pan lifts the jar, probably filled with wine, towards the Ariadne, while Nike crowns the god. So here we have it. It's a pan. Here is Ariadne. Here is Dionysius. Here is the victory. Another object. This is also a belt worn by a prince of Teliatepe. Dionysius portrayed holding a wine cup, riding a panther seated in a side saddle. So the fame of Dionysius as the god of wine and the inspirer of ritual madness and ecstasy is attested by the iconography in many sculptures evoking Dionysius or his entourage were found in Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Pakistan, showing his popularity in these areas. These Hellenistic motifs were absorbed by Indian or Indianized Greek artists in Gandhara and interpreted them in an Indian context. So here is a very important document, a toilet tray, showing the Dionysian scenes found in Taxila, now in the National Museum in New Delhi. So if you look very carefully what you see, first you see Dionysius with Ariadne. She is giving a cup to the god to drink, certainly wine. And you have two musicians here. One is playing a harp. Other person is playing a flute. Then we have two people. One is climbed over the back of the other to give more weight, pressing grapes. So here is a tank-like thing, and the grapes is pressed, and he's collecting the grapefruit, the third person. And then the grape is put into a huge jar for the fermentation. And the person here is tasting the wine to see whether it is nicely fermented. And as you know, when you drink too much, this is what happens. And you have two people completely drunk. So when you look at some of the Gandharan, there are many, but I'll show you the most important one. This is in the Hirayama Eco Museum, published by my good friend Tanabe, where you have a Dionysian parade. The Dionysus or Dionysus-like person seated here, and here is a chariot driven by the panther, and also the whole atmosphere is Greek. And again, this is from the Tokyo National Museum. This person is carrying the goat skin, the wine. The best way to transport wine is directly drinking from the goat skin to the hand, and the wine is poured into his hand. And here we have probably Dionysius as an old man and Ariadne as a young woman, and holding a huge cup, and both are drinking. And this is more Indianized version of Dionysius, where he's drinking, the woman is giving him to drink, and the other person with the goat skin. This is in the private collection of Jimmy Pinto, where you can see the Dionysian-like figure on the horseback, and the woman with the huge crater giving him to drink. And these are all Gandharan sculptures that come to that. And again, this is in a private collection. You can see some music and flirting scenes. This one is in the Hirayama collection once again. He's drunk, and this person is pouring wine into the jar from the goat skin. And here you have the dancers. So they are all in a Buddhist sculpture, but showing some sort of Dionysian Dionysiac elements of the feasts. And these are in the Cleveland Museum of Art. And it's very interesting that you can see here the man and woman is holding the jar, and she is drinking semi-nude. And this person is holding the goat skin, and he has poured wine into the big jar. This is in the Oriental Museum, Tokyo, where you have a old and young woman, and then they are holding wine and they drink wine. And this is a very important one in the Hirayama collection published by Tanabe. It is a base of a statue, or if there was a statue of a Buddha. What you have on the base, carved on the base, is the Dionysian seated on a panther, assisted by two women here, and one is playing music. This is again in the Cleveland Museum. You can see drunk Dionysius, others are flirting. This is from the ancient Oriental Museum in Tokyo. The god, it's not probably not Dionysus, maybe a pan. And again, another one where you have the flirting scenes. This is not Dionysus. As you can see, the horns, these are pans and indulged in sexual activities. This is a sculpture from Tokyo National Museum. And of course, you have the drunk Dionysius held by a woman and a man. And here the woman is playing a flute, and this one is doing something funny. One day I can remember my good friend Katsumi Tanabe asked me, what is that instrument? I told him I didn't know. I mean, until I went to Morocco in 2019 in June in Casablanca, I saw this public spectacle where a kid is dancing on a drum like him and making a sound. So this should have been one of the element of music during that period, which was lost but still continuing in Morocco. And here again, another scene base, which is in our museum, where you have the drinking and the flirting scenes. And this was found in Sarderi by our Japanese colleagues who excavated, Japanese and Pakistani colleagues excavated the site, where you have a couple drinking, playing music, dancing, and flirting. And again, another one from the Hirayama Museum. This is from the Boston Museum, where you have a person bringing grapes, and with the weight of a child, he is pressing the grapes and flirting scene. And again, this is from the Museo Nazionale Arte Orientale in Rome, where you have another makeup scene and the flirting scene. So how to explain these Dionysius things? Of course, I'm not going to explain the different hypotheses put forward by my colleagues and scholars like Klaus Fischer, Katsumi Tanabe, Sardar, Martha Cart, and recently Jesse Pons, because of the lack of time. But before that, I would like to, the question was, where these reliefs were found, what was the structural context? Most of them were found without any archaeological context. Some of them are accidental finds or illicit diggings, or others were dropped from the original structures without giving any archaeological context. And some of them are pedestal or base of statues, like the one in the Lahore Museum. And also they were fixed into stair rises, like here, the one found in Afghanistan, now exhibited in Museum Gimi. And also these, these ones, which is in the Cleveland Museum, I think they also served as stair rises like these here. And also they also depict on the upper panel or upper register, where here you have the life in the palace and the great departure. Here you have these people, Putis and Erotos, dancing the Dionysian scene. One of the most important discoveries ever made in recent years is this stupa, which came from Pune, which I published for the first time in the book. And it enables us to solve, to a certain extent, some of the problems concerning the Dionysian scenes in Gandharan art. Here are the dimensions of the stupa. There is an inscription written in Gandhāran alphabet. It was read by Richard Solomon in 2011, and he read Pious Gift of Sarira, Buddhi, and Ayaspata. Three names: one is Greek, one is Indian, and one is Scythian. It's a very early sculpture, very early stupa of the Gandharan period, which could be dated somewhere around the second century, early second century CE. It has 6 structures or 6 registers, and this is the drawing I proposed of different registers, and this is how it is. So on the bottom we have the lotus flowers separated by Corinthian columns. Then we have the garland bearers, and then we have big depictions of the life episodes of the Buddha. Here, for example, presentation of Yashodhara to Siddhartha. And then we have the life story of the Buddha following the Larita Vistara, I would say quickly, this is exactly following the Lalta and sequential. As I told you, it is every scene is staged. It's like an act in the theater. The dream of Maya, interpretation of the dream, birth of Siddhartha, hot and cold water bath, Asita predicting the future of the Buddha, the fiesta given to Asita, Siddhartha going to school, Siddhartha at school, archery contest, life in the palace, Bodhisattva encountering four uh, uh, omens. One is the old age and the sick man, and his decision to leave the palace, the great departure for Maha Abhinishkamani. And here is, his horse is held by these gods. And then he's giving his jewelry to Channa and asking him to give them to his father. And here he exchanges his silken clothes with the hunter. And the Channa and the Kantaka coming to the palace and giving the jewelry to Mahaprajapati. And here you have Nagakalika saying that you will become the Buddha. And of course, the enlightenment scene is not shown. Brahma and Indra asking Buddha to preach Mahaparinirvana and the cremation. And then we have what we call the Dionysian scenes. And then you have the generic Buddhas showing some sort of a paradise. And then the Harmika and the Chatravali. So this is what I am going to, the last 10 minutes that I have, I am going to show you this carefully, this register here in the order. So it follows this order here. First harvesting, plucking grapes. And of course, there are so many sarcophagus with the vintage scenes from Rome. This is from Gettivilla. And then the pressing. So people bring grapes and they put into the tank and they press the grapes and take the juice. And here is another sculpture from Gime, where you can see the man is trampling the grapes. And then you have the fermentation and the distribution of wine. And then people carrying wine in goat skin. Like the scene from Cleveland Museum, people are drinking. And here you have the small Heracles. And they are pouring into big craters. And then people start drinking, almost like in paradise. They are very happy. They are seated in rocky sceneries, and he's pouring wine and he's drinking. And then they start flirting, kissing, right? You can see the wine here, the goat skin. And then you have the flirting scenes. And these are some of the scenes in the stupa. It's almost showing something like the Indra's paradise or Triatimsa, where you have wine, you have sex and everything. But it's almost like Pompeii paintings. But the register does not stop with that. This is what is important. It stops with these two scenes, where you can see monks reading the scripture, the Holy Scripture. This could be birchwood, this could be also palm leaves. So one is reading, others are discussing, and one is meditating, and also in Dhani Mudra. So it shows the end. At the end, you meditate and you think about it, and then you go to the upper structure, which is the paradise of the Buddhas. When I studied, first showed this stupa at the Yale University, my good friend to whom I dedicate this paper, Stan Linsler, told me, Osman, look, this is what you have is the cosmos. This is a Chakraval cosmology. And he said the layered panels of the stupa reflect the usual Indian view of the stratified world. This sequence represents stratification from heaven downwards. So these are some of the places where you find it. For example, in Mahabharata, Devas, Gandharvas, Yakshas, Nagas, Prativas, Rakshas. And also in Ramayana, you have this Sadeva, Gandhara, Manushya, and all of them. So this is the stratified world in the Hindu context. So if you look at it very carefully, so first you have the gods or the generic Buddhas depicting some sort of a highest achievement in Buddhism. And then you have the middle region, so almost like an intermediary paradise of the Gandharvas and Yakshas. And then you have the earth-crawling creatures like Manushas represented by Buddha and his entourage and different people. And then we have earth creature crawling, Urga and Naga, the cobras, and then finally the subterranean creature, Rakshas and Asuras. It's very interesting to note Martha Carter, whom I admire much. In 1992, without even knowing the existence of the Buddhist stupa that I first published last year, wrote like a prophecy. You know, the stupa was published only last year. This is what she wrote in 1992. These illustrations, referring to the illustrations in Gandhara, although inspired by contemporary pagan festivities, were intended as views of the sensual delights of the most accessible of the Buddhist heavens in the Chakraval cosmos. This is exactly what you see in the stupa. It takes no great leap of intuition to suggest that Indra's heaven, like that of four great kings, Lokapalas or the Chatra Maharajikas, was envisaged by Gandhāran Budhists as a realm of bacchanal delights. Such visual elements of Gandhāran Buddhist art were suppressed, however, as new ideologies and iconographic programs evolved in the later Kuṣāṇ era. Probably the old Dionysiac paradise themes were replaced by representation of Sukhavati Amitabha. So to conclude, so this layout of the stupa has a resemblance to the Chakraval cosmology. So bearing in mind the fact that the stupa is the physical and terrestrial representation of the cosmos, the depiction of Siddhartha Gautama's life and the roles of Buddha could respectively illustrate the world of men, Manusya, and of heaven, world of Devas. Therefore, within the Gandhāran Buddhist context, Dionysian motifs could be understood as a symbolic representation of the intermediary world of Yakshas. Obviously, the lower heavens of the slopes of the world mountain were far more accessible, even if they were only temporary way stations in the inevitable cycle of rebirth. We also have representation of the world of the crawling creatures, Urga and Naga. The last straight of the stupa carved with lotuses, flowers rooted in the mud, opening up to the right, such would illustrate the subterranean world of Rakshas, Danavas, and Asuras. In conclusion, the presence of Greeks in Gandhara from the conquest of Alexander has continued for another 6 centuries, leaving reminiscence of the past in the minds and the behaviors of the various populations of the region. The depictions related to Dionysius, the god of ecstasy and intoxication, is a good example to show how cultural interactions with the Hellenistic world in these frontier regions gave birth to the emergence of composite iconography. So I conclude this talk by quoting my good friend, John Boatman, quote, "The success of classical art in Gandhara was probably largely the result of the earlier infiltration of Greek art into India and of the skillful choice by Indian artists of what would serve them. Beyond and after Gandhara, it was only trappings of classical art that survived, but survived they did, and tenaciously." Thanks all of you for listening
Thank
to the
you.
talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you all the participants